The GAA Hour with Colm Parkinson is brought to you by Paddy Power, home of the money back special.
And when I started running, I suppose I didn't stop, and when I got the chance to go, I said I should go, and so I opened up.
We were only the small little fish out there, so we are on there.
I don't know where to start this week, Cheddar, because there's so much bloody going on in the hurling world. Dominating the news cycle hurling is since the Sunday game kicked off. There's been nothing but talk about Donal Logue and Derek McGrath. We might get onto that a little bit later. There's been nothing but talk about VAR, and all this coming after a brilliant weekend of hurling, which some people think this is overshadowing what was an absolutely brilliant weekend of hurling.
Yeah, I think, Willie, there's a little bit of that in it, all right. It was dominated by one or two comments, I suppose, more than anything else. It still didn't, I suppose, change the feeling that people had about the two games. Like, they were just edge of the seat stuff, with a lot of, good technical stuff going on in them as well for, people that wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the game and that. And obviously, I suppose the two winners just showed a level of, I suppose, relentlessness that we haven't maybe seen for a little while in different games, and I suppose that underpins everything in hurling really. So I just think the commentary and that, look, we might talk about that later on, but it probably did take a little bit away from the general comment that should have been on the quality of the games. I think somebody else mentioned that as well, and particularly to do with different styles and that. I don't think that was dealt with adequately, and I think there's an awful lot more discussion on that could take place, which would inform people about what is going on the field. Yeah.
So one of the big things that's been called for is VAR to come into hurling. Now, the GAA's newly appointed national match officials manager, he's Donny Smith from Meath. He's been talking about it on Monday. He says, how good can technology be? In relation to the line ball on Saturday, is it conclusive? Even if you had VAR, was it conclusive? Now, I would say that one was. The pictures shown on television in relation to it didn't show a major deviation of the ball. The ball dipped rather than deviated. We always have to keep an open mind on technology. We're talking about refereeing. The work that referees are putting in to make a decision in a game is huge as well. So, he's not ruling it out, but he is making the point. Is VAR needed in hurling? I'm on the side to say that says no. But there's a lot of people calling for it, even our own leash manager, Eddie Brennan.
I certainly wouldn't like to see it. I think anything that slows down the game in any shape or form, I just wouldn't go with unless it was absolutely necessary. Would it have added anything to the decisions that was made? Well, look, some of those decisions may very well have went against the decision of the referee. I've heard other various calls, Wooly, as well, for a second referee to be in hurling at that. Look, I disagree with all of that. I think even if you just wanted to sort of road test that decision against the decisions that was made, would they have changed anything? Well, if they did, they would have changed the interpretation of the referee who was there. All of the decisions that was in dispute were well within the eyesight of the referee, and he made an interpretation on it based on what he saw. And look, if you're going to go anything different than that, you're going to have a discussion on the field between two people, which might take a couple of minutes to resolve. And even if they're in dispute, who is going to resolve that? I do think.
Well, the two referees would ref either half, so they wouldn't discuss anything. It's just with the ball being, say, a clearance. When that lands, there would be a referee closer to that action than there would be.
I think that's madness, Wooly, to be honest with you. I do know in basketball to do it on both sides and that, and there may be other sports.
Aussie rules, the compromise rules and Aussie rules.
Compromise rules and that, but that was more to do with the problems earlier on and two countries being involved in that, rather than that the game, that the Aussie rules was so fast that they needed two referees on both sides of the field. It is an incredibly quick game. And very, very physical, and a lot of the stuff that we have here is just simply different interpretations. I do think, Wooly, that looking back, and I don't want to comment on the two referees on Sunday, but we probably had more experienced referees over a number of years that we don't have now, and that's the first point I would probably make.
Just on that, the two referees at the weekend, Alan Kelly and Sean Clear, had never refed an All-Ireland semi-final before.
No, that's true. But look, there's always going to be a first time, Willie. And I know Sean Clear very well, and I know Alan very well. Both of them started actually in the old Leinster Championship, the preliminary Leinster Championship a number of years ago, and that's where they sort of served their time. And I would say, I know I've commented on this before, Willie, and it's probably holding true now a little bit for Sunday as well, that in those years, those referees were under, I suppose, such oversight from assessors and all of that they refereed absolutely by the rule. And the referee, and I mean, I've said this a number of times, actually Liam Sheedy has said this a number of times, that the refereeing at that level in those years was much, much stricter than what you would see at All-Ireland semi-final or final level or Leinster final level or even senior championship level at that time. It was a very, very different form of referee, and you needed to know that to prepare your team for it. And I just wonder, is that change from, refereeing strictly by the rule to your interpretation as you see it, while still at the same time trying to allow the game to flow, is that well managed? Right. I think there's a couple of things. Look, no more than players. Let's consider the human aspect here. No more than players, people make mistakes. Nobody holds me as a manager or a player to account for missing a score or something like that. Limerick missed 15 or 16 of them in their game. Did somebody point that out and say, look, you made a mistake there, you missed shots in front of the goal? That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is that, look, you do need a bit of experience to referee at this level. And, maybe there's more time to be served, or maybe there's another step to be served before you move up to that level. It's huge, huge pressure. And, particularly with a game that's, where both teams are really going at one another. Hurling games are easy enough to referee if the game is flowing and there's not a huge amount of tackles flying in, and it's not very competitive play and all of that. But when it's like it was last Saturday night and Sunday, where, the tackling from certainly in one team in both games was very, very serious and very, very tough, then it's much more difficult to referee. The second point I would like to make on that, Willie, is, I suppose, to do with referees. Do we retire experienced referees too quickly when we know that we don't have a number of experienced referees to step into their shoes?
I would say yes.
In this instance, I think we would. And no reflection on Sean and on Alan, because like no more than a player, no more than a manager, you've got to start somewhere and you've got to learn as you go along. This is learning on the job as you go along and gaining experience as you go along. So no reflection on them. But I would say this, would Barry Kelly and Dickie Murphy have been accused of the things that the lads made? And, I think some of the assessment of their decisions after that proved that they were right. It's just that the conditions, particularly with the goal and all of those things, that it was unfortunate it happened during the match. I do think, and I would be a little bit critical of Willie Barrett in this in terms of the referees, coordinator or director at the minute, that, look, the refereeing standards in the last couple of years haven't been what they have been in other years. But I qualify that by saying no more than players or no more than any other walk of life. You may just simply not have had the quality of candidate to do it at the minute. But I'll wrap all of that up and I'll say, sorry, there's one other point I want to make, Willie. The referees on the sideline, or the sideline people in these games, are top-class referees. They could very well be refereeing the All-Ireland. Why not have the team of referees on the day and give them a little bit more power, that when they see something, I mean, it was madness, the sideline ball. And look, I disagree with Donald Smith on that. I thought it was pretty clear that it touched something. Yeah. Look, the ball doesn't just change flight that much in mid-air, even though the likes of Paul Flynn from Waterford and some of these can bend the ball, but certainly that wasn't the case here. And I mean, the silence man was what was he? 2 or 3 meters away from it, 10 meters. I mean, even Buckley wasn't far enough back from the ball, so he was quite clear to him, and clearly saw that the play or the ball was interfered with, but may not have just simply have had the power to actually call the referee and say, look, this should be a free the other way, or whatever or should be retaken, or whatever it is. I may not have the power to do that. I think that would help. So not necessarily have you a referee going up and down the field, but you actually have 3 referees going up and down the field.
If they should not be called linesmen.
No, I agree with that.
Linesmen have only got one job, to call line balls. Like, give me a break. These are referees. You're right. They're referees. And here's another thing you wonder. I think we talked about this either on this show or on the football show. Are those linesmen who are also referees who want to get the final And these are all competitors as well. Don't be fooled into thinking that they're not. Are they motivated, or would they be happier if the referee who's reffing the game is getting things a little bit out of control and now they're all in the same hat for an All-Ireland final? Do you think that feeds into it? I think it does.
I think it might be a valid point, Wooly. And look, I've seen even the warm-up and that the main referee dictates the warm-up and all of that the referees do, even though the other two people may be more experienced on him than that. And I think if you had that sort of team ethos between the two sidelines men, let's just call them that for the minute, and the main referee, look, I don't think anything would get by them. And if it did, it would be an interpretation issue whereby you might interpret something based on what you think it is versus what he thinks it is. And in that instance, I'd always defer to the referee. I certainly won't know the rules or how they should be applied more than the referee, because that's what they regularly train on. Well, there's one other point I just wanted to make. Why are there so many instances now where when the ball goes wide or goes over the bar but doesn't go over the top of the goalpost, are we calling in the videos to look at that? Look, I just think if you're an umpire and you stand behind the goal, I've no problem in some of the ones. I've no problem if the sun is in your eyes. I've no problem if you're standing behind the goal because the shot's been taken from a very different angle. But if you can't see a sliotar going either left or right of the post, I'm not so sure you should be there as an umpire in the first place. And there just seems to be an awful lot of people just taking the easy way out here. Let's call in the Hawkeye here to make a decision on that. If we're going to go to some stage or other, we don't need umpires at all. Let's just press the button for Hawkeye all of the time.
They're going to it a lot now, but we know umpires are lawless. Umpires don't receive any training, do they? They're just friends of the referee. Anyone can become an umpire.
I know. I think at that level you probably would. I don't know that. I can't answer that question.
No, they have the referee has their teams and they travel. That's their team, and that's it.
Yeah, and look, you've got to respect as well that the referee brings his team with him. And of course, when he gets an All-Ireland, look, that's, I suppose, the benefits that the umpires get, and they're deserving of that. Look, you could say, why not referees in an All-Ireland semi-final and final? Why not referees as umpires and linesmen? We've enough of them around, and reward them properly for that. But, if you were to do that, then you're saying to a referee, look, you have 4 people that's been travelling with you in the car.
Yeah, and they deserve their All-Ireland too.
They deserve their All-Ireland. In the National League matches below in a Moore Park and muck and shite and all of that, and then you expect when the big day comes that you say, sorry, you're not travelling with me next Sunday. I suppose that's unfair as well. It's difficult to get it right, but I just think if there's not training for them or tests for them similar to that there is for referees, maybe there should be, and that sort of does away with that a little bit. Now, we've got to take this on the chin, Wooly, as well. You are dependent on knowing your umpire and knowing that he's going to see he's your eyes behind the goal. But at the same time,
they don't use that enough now.
No, they don't. But at the same time, you've got to depend on him. But at the same time, he needs to make the right decision, I suppose. He can't just make a favourable decision because he thinks that's what you want or something like that. He needs to stand up on his own 2 feet and say, this is what I saw. No more than if it was an RTA on the road or something like that. You need to stand up and say, this is what I saw. And, if somebody else contradicts that, well, so be it. 2 witnesses may have 2 different views on things, and then the referee interprets that and makes his decision. And I'll wrap up all of this because I've been on the record a number of times of saying this. Unless there's a serious deterioration in the quality of referees, we're going to have to take some things on the chin. Unfortunately, it hurts some teams in very, very big games and all of that. And some people, I think went a little bit far and says, the referee cost Limerick last Sunday evening. Well, did Limerick cost themselves by shooting 16 wides rather than the referee? I think we should,
I think there's a culture in the GAA Cheddar, and we've heard them all at matches, and you hear lads 5 minutes into the game and they're on the referee's back. Yes. And that culture is there. Now, I was never involved in it. I don't pay much attention to the referee unless it's a blatant thing, but there are a huge amount of people that their obsession from the time to start watching a match is that the referee's riding them. And that's in the GAA, and we know lads like that. Yeah. So the referee's always going to come under scrutiny. I think the solution of calling the 2 linesmen assistant referees and giving them more authority, but also more scrutiny as well, because let's be honest, they're on easy streets. Imagine getting a linesman job in a big match. You're waving a flag right or left.
No, I fully agree with that. And it should be mic'd up with the referee. Considering where technology has gone now, the sidelines man should be a referee in everything but maybe even name, I'd say.
Assistant referee. We should stop calling them linesmen. But
I just make one other comment, because you mentioned about Alan and you mentioned about Sean. I thought Brian Gavin was harsh in his commentary on the 2 lads. Brian's a former and a very, very experienced referee and a very, very good one. But I thought he should have understood that this is the first time that these guys guys were refereeing at this level, and should have qualified what he said in terms of the comments he made about the two boys.
What about his comment on, this was in the Examiner, he said that Sean Cleere shouldn't have been appointed to take charge of the All-Ireland semi-final because he's from Kilkenny. Now, this is being said, I don't think he'd have done, first I don't think he had done enough to be given the job, which is, okay, a little bit harsh, but look, you're entitled to your opinion. And then when Kilkenny were in the other semi-final the day before, it only added to the pressure on him. So there's no question that Sean is going to favour a team, but there's a lot of spotlight on him and pressure on him not to be seen to favour a team, which, you know what I mean? It just can mess up your decision or thought process or decision making, maybe.
I'll take the 2 points, Willie, and they're sort of interrelated, really. If you were an experienced referee, that wouldn't come into it at all. And I genuinely never saw a referee. Look, he wouldn't know anyway. Did Brian Cody want to play Limerick, or did he want to play Wexford, or did he want to play Tipperary? I'd say Sean wouldn't have known.
Yeah.
And I've never seen a referee in my time looking at it that I thought that they favoured somebody. Now, maybe at the lower levels, but certainly not at inter-county level. And I just thought that even, Brian's a former referee, knows that that's not right, and I don't think he should have said that. I think I'm going back to the other point in terms of Sean Cleare's experience. He's been certainly a referee in a number of years and has a level of experience. But I think this is going back to the Willie Barrett in terms of the appointment, and that, do they judge that players have enough experience and enough expertise to be able to, referee this game? And as I said, referees can be very unfortunate and get a game that's very difficult to referee. How many times have we said, oh, your man was a great referee because he let the game flow and we didn't see him? Well, we didn't see him because the game allowed him not to be seen. He might come into the very next game with 2 different teams playing in a different way, where they're going at one another's throats from the very, very start. And there's timber flying and all of that, and now he's going to have to intervene, and now we do see him. So some people, I find sometimes that there's ridiculous comments about that. And I'll wrap this up, coming back to what you said, Wooly. You might hear Kilkenny supporters saying, oh, the referee rode us and he did this and he did that and he did the other. And you'll just turn your head the other way and you'll hear a group of Tipperary supporters or Cork supporters or whoever it is saying the very same thing against them. Now, surely somebody in the middle has to say, he's either one way or he's the other, or he's totally bad altogether. I don't know.
It actually seems to be that way now, if you're following on Twitter, that both sets of supporters are saying they're being rode. And it's just like people see someone saying it and then they're agreeing. I don't think there's any logic to it, because I didn't think, like, you could argue that the referee in the Tip Wexford match was very harsh on Tipperary, and if you're to break it down, there's 2 genuine goals that should have been allowed that weren't, and that's not even the Hawkeye goal, that there's 2 goals either side of that should have been given. But then you could see some other examples of frees that they gave, or potential penalty against Wexford. I don't know, it's just constant giving out about the referee, it seems to me. Maybe it's the way hurling's gone now, that middle third's so congested and people don't know what frees are, and the referee's just coming. It seems to be a new thing. Maybe it's just this weekend, but the referee's just coming under outlandish scrutiny.
Well, look, the first, I suppose, if you were to ask, how can I test this? You ask anybody to define the tackle.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
I tell you, I'll be here a long time before somebody will give me the exact same answer and will get it right. So if the tackle in most instances are in the ruck, or in the, I suppose, battle for possession of the ball, if most frees happen within that, and we can't actually define what that is, even standing back here with all of these video and all this analysis tools, how do we expect a referee to get it right every time?
Another point I made on Monday, Cheddar, not to cut you off, is because referees are encouraged to let it flow, and you want to let it flow, they let some fouls go. Yep. So what foul can you let go and what foul do you blow then? So any foul you blow, you're riding it, because you've let other, and we don't want to see a referee blowing every foul, or else the game will be terrible to watch. So how the hell do you improve this then?
You can't. And look, there's, this is human people doing the best that they can. Now, I think if a referee is consistently poor, well then look, he shouldn't get the big matches or so. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that key influencers in the GAA should just simply stand up and say, I looked at that game. That referee made a couple of mistakes both ways. So would I if I was there, so would you. And either we completely change the rules of the game and go to VAR and go to all of of these technologies to stop the game and we're stop-starting and all of this type of stuff like rugby, if we go to that, I won't be going to hurling matches. Is all I'll tell
it'd be
you.
terrible because not only are umpires going to Hawkeye a bit more, now you're going to be going to like I said on Monday, there was so many incidents in Wexford Tip. You could have made a case for VAR 8 times.
Yes.
Now you throw your 3 Hawkeyes onto that. That's a load of nonsense.
Woody,
Isn't
that's really what I mean here. And would you blame a referee if he was getting this brunt of criticism when he has got this tool in his back pocket to press the button and say, we're going to go to VAR, we're going to go to whatever they're going.
You'd be at it the whole time.
Of course he's going to go to it. Why wouldn't he to stop this? So I'd say, key GAA influencers, stand up and be counted here and call this for what it is. I'm not saying that poor refereeing should be allowed. No, it shouldn't. We should train people up. We should keep the experienced ones, and whatever needs to be done to make that the best we can. But when that's done, stop all this sort of silly criticism.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. I was actually surprised that a lot of hurling people, which I thought would be allergic to VAR, were actually calling it in. It was a weird one.
I think that's driven, Woody, by something different. I think you always need to look at it. Well, why is there a trend going left or right here? I think that's maybe driven by a perception among people that players are given so much now that everything needs to be exactly right and perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect.
Right, okay, well, that's fair enough. Talking about nothing being perfect, the Sunday game came in for big criticism on Sunday night. Derek McGrath and Don Logue in particular, there's loads of different talking points in this, right? So, my take on this was that it was completely the wrong timing for this. Both men had made these points before. It looked a little bit like an agenda that did a chip on their shoulder about this. Another thing is they're criticising colleagues of theirs on the Sunday game. They're criticising legends of the game like Ger Loughnane, Cyril Farrell, Liam Sheedy, Ken McGrath, Henry Shefflin, all these fellas saying their analysis wasn't good enough. It sounded a little bit egotistical, and didn't hit the right tone of what that show should have started with, and now RT producers need to be stronger and say, right lads, that's maybe a valuable chat, but further down the show we can't start with this or else it looks like an agenda. You know what I mean? That's a production problem. It looks like Don Logue kicked it all off and Derek got sucked into it. Derek's no problem banging this drum. He's done it before already. He's clearly been a little bit hurt by watching the Sunday game and incorrect analysis from that he could see, and he's watched this for 5 years. So it's understandable on a human level that he wants to point this out. But at the same time, I want to make the point that I would completely disagree with them having had that conversation in the first section of that show.
Yes, I'd agree with a lot of the points, Wooly, and there's some of them I would disagree with. And I might just look at the ones that I agree with. First of all, I think there were 2 brilliant games. I don't think it should have set the tone. And I think, this is something that, if this had happened during the course of the game and it was knee-jerk reaction to a question that was asked or something like that, I would accept it. Obviously, it's a Sunday game. People had plenty of time to review what they were going to say and so on and so on.
It was more than planned, and Des Cal did nothing to stop that conversation if it wasn't planned. He facilitated that conversation. I think
anybody that knows the media would sort of know, what actually happened there.
Yeah.
But I think it probably, it probably arose really from Davy being asked a question. And I just think that, Davy himself might want to answer this differently in future. Instead of reacting to somebody asking about, what do you think the sweeper system, and do you think it's the right one for Wexford, and do you think it's successful, and all of those things. And I think, I think Davy just needs to show his own confidence in what he believes himself. And he just simply needs to answer that, yes, I do. And, what's more importantly, my team do. And that kills everything. And I think, he may very well, if he wanted to go a step further in something like that, he may very well ask, obviously the question then is leaning towards is the sweeper, system stifling hurling and that. And he may very well draw a comparison with what Brian Hogan said, that, bear in mind Brian Hogan was centre half back on the best Kilkenny team, or the best team ever. So he's generally speaking reflecting how that best team played. And his comments really was, well, look, let's bull into their best players and let's tear into the game here. That's our primary way of doing things. And
sorry to cut you off. I thought Brian Hogan's was gas. I was reading his comments, and he was adamant that Kilkenny didn't do tactics, and then he continued on to discuss what tactics they did.
I thought that was interesting, but I thought even just from Davies and Derek's perspective, that if you were to ask the question, And look, Willie, I'm not going to let journalists off here. I think journalists are very, very lazy in their sort of synopsis and their analysis of this, with a couple of notable exceptions that do look at this. But they just look at the periphery of this. Let's look at Wexford, and I'm not even going to comment on what Wexford are doing. I'm commenting on what Davy is saying they're doing, and I'm commenting on what Brian said they were doing. What stifles creative hurling more? A sweeper who tried to work the ball up the side and find space to get the scores, or that you go in and you take out their best players? I don't mean take them out outside of the rules, but you get into the face and you play in the face. So I think that it's that level of discussion that needs to take place, rather than just lazy articles about real high level analysis of it's nearly populist at this stage to go against sweeper and that. And look, I'm just going to roll on a little bit on that, Wooly, a little bit, because I suppose, why do you play with sweepers? And let's bring that discussion on a little bit more, because if you want to stay traditional and just beat the ball up and down the field, well, look, that goes against a lot of team sports and what has happened in a lot of major team sports over the years. And I suppose you have to ask first, why do managers and coaches come up with different methods of play? And there's a number of reasons. The main one is to try and gain an edge in the opposition. They're not ready for you. You're bringing something new to the table. They're not able to deal with it. You get an edge during the game and you keep it to the end of the game. You win the match and then you move on. Or you may not very well be a strong county traditionally, and you may not have the volume of quality players, either forwards or backs or midfielders or something like that, and you've got to play in a different way, because at the end of the day, your best chance is to play the best system that suits your players, not what your supporters think or anybody else. So that may very well be a reason. And the most important thing is you design a method of play to suit your personnel. And let's just compare this to soccer. And I don't look at soccer, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I just know this little bit about it. There was different changes in soccer over the years. Started off in the early 1900s and early late 1800s, and I think it was nearly 2 people up the field, where you generally speaking sold the ball to the next man, and if you were under pressure, you only passed it in. There certainly wasn't a combination play and all of those type of things. And I suppose in the 30s, I think the English team changed that around. They looked at a more structured setup. They brought sort of centre halves into the game. I think that Chapman was the manager to actually do that. And in the 50s, the Hungarian team, they had a different way of playing as well. They had a way of playing which is not dissimilar to the way coaches are going at the minute. Their striker dropped deeper, and he was a sort of a playmaker as such. And the idea was really to find space to put the ball into, to move on to and to play. And I suppose that was their way, really, to get attackers into space to receive the ball, rather than just passing it man to man. And again, it moved on. We all know now in the recent period about Dutch football, I think it has been described as, any player in any position could turn up anywhere and be able to play that position.
Total football. I think that was Don Logue's point. It was a silly point talking about the last remnants of colonialism in the island, but the point he was making about the British being slow to accept change within their game, and it was the Hungarians and the Dutch that evolved soccer. Is that the kind of twisted point he was making? The idea to compare people criticism with the English, that was silly. Yeah. But there was a point that maybe he was trying to make in there. I think his
point well, I do fully agree with that. And if I was just finishing off on that, look, you had obviously Barcelona with tiki-taka, and then you moved on to the Gegenpress. Somebody else described that in a hurling article there recently as well, that Klopp used with Liverpool. And I think that Donald was trying to describe that, and obviously sailed into the political sphere. I don't know. I don't know what Irishman now is not confident enough to stand on his own 2 feet and not worry about what happened 100 years ago and all of those type of stuff. So I don't know the logic of the point he was making. I only assume that that's what he was trying to explain. That soccer analogy is such that it took him a long time, and it wasn't really English people outside of Chapman that made these started changes to get up to the modern game. Incidentally, Wooly, just on another game that's very tactically based is basketball, and not dissimilar. There was periods in basketball as well through great coaches that had to, I suppose, adapt to the circumstances that were in front of them, and their teams reflected that. You'd have liked Wooden and Dean Smith and Pitino. I think Pitino was the guy that when the 3 point line came into play, all his teams, for some reason or other, scored way more 3-pointers, and obviously were very, very successful in doing that than other teams. So he had to reflect that. Ditto with, in basketball, there was a time when coaches used to hold onto the ball to try and get the player into the right place to take the shot, and of course then that delayed the game, and they had to bring in the 30-second rule and then the 24-second rule clock and so on and so on. Yeah. One other point I wanted to make on that, if you compare the sweeper system, if you compare at the minute the Golden State Warriors, I think they've won 3 NBAs in a row, or certainly 3 in 4 years anyway, and they're phenomenal 3-point shooters. Not that terribly different, Willie, to a sweeper system where you've got to shoot from distance. You need good shooters from distance. So there are some parallels here in innovative ways of playing the game that coaches have brought in that were successful in other sports and that would be successful in hurling. And without a shadow of a doubt, if Limerick had got their long-range shooting right, they were, like, I've seen some articles that said, Kilkenny pressed them, put the pressure on them. They didn't. I was at the game. They literally just shot them wide. There was nobody on them in some instances. So if they had got their long-range shooting right, they would have clearly won the game against Kilkenny, and we would have a whole different picture and a different view then about structured play versus the traditional play as such. And I'll make one other comment, Willie, and I want to go back to one other point here. Why did Wexford... What was the key part of Wexford losing the game? I think in the last 15 minutes, even though they had a man up, whether it was under panic pressure, I don't think it was an instruction because Davy more or less cleared that up after the game. Wexford actually went traditional. At a time when they should have really stayed doing what they were doing, that an extra man in the back, and what did they do? Play high ball up the field. This is going back to traditional. Poke the ball high into Tony Doran and we'll play off the breaks. Except they should have done the exact opposite of what they were doing beforehand. Work the ball up the sides, work it across the field, wreck Tipperary players in terms of conditioning and move them around the place, and they didn't do it. So I think, even the result certainly nearly justifies this, that you may very well have a way of playing, and I'm not saying it's sweeper, it could be, there's a whole different methods of playing, but once you go back traditional, there's nothing saying that the traditional will win the game, which is, I think, is the sort of, a sense of what's coming out of the argument out of some quarters, that the traditional game will win you things.
That's the argument, and the whole thing, and I do take the Derek and Dawn Logue's point, this kind of analysis, they let the shackles off and that's why they won, when Derek's saying that we didn't actually let the shackles off. And I remember bit of analysis because Joe Brawley be at this same kind of thing on the football. It was a Connacht final between Roscommon and Galway, and Roscommon did well in the first half and he blamed Galway's structure for that, and then Galway won well in the second half because they had a strong wind and they took over in midfield, and when you take over in midfield you're winning kickouts and your forwards are actually in an offensive position, and he said they let the shackles off. They didn't. I was at the game. They didn't change anything, and Kevin Walsh, their manager, confirmed that with me the next day. So I completely sympathise, because coming from the Sunday game pundits for too long was analysis based around intensity, analysis based around the sweeper being really bad, and analysis around it. If you ended up winning the game with a sweeper, it's because you took the shackles off. Now, I hated that stuff and thought it wasn't fair. Now, in the Sunday game pundits' defence, the sweeper has evolved. So the sweeper we saw on Sunday for Wexford was a lot different than the sweeper we saw with Derek McGrath, for example, whereas Wexford wasted very little ball. Like, they used the ball brilliantly from runners coming from the back. I think when that sweeper started, it was more of a defensive sweeper. Now you see them using the sweeper in a different way by freeing up their defenders just to take off, bring the forwards out of position. And I thought back with Derek's sweeper, when they were playing that, I thought they hit a lot of aimless ball down to the forwards, whereas Wexford don't hit as much aimless ball anymore. So as the sweeper is evolving, some of the criticism of the sweeper at the start wasn't the sweeper, it was of use of ball. It was, I can kind of see it from both sides a little bit. There's not as much criticism of the sweeper now, because the sweeper, and absolutely, I'm sure if Derek McGrath was still manager of Waterford, they would have, evolved the sweeper maybe a bit more. Laois used the sweeper in a very offensive way, and they never wasted ball. They never drove, stupid ball down on outnumbered players. But I think that in the Sunday game pundits' defence, their criticism of the sweeper 3 years ago wouldn't be their criticism of it now, if you get me.
No, I disagree with that, Willie, to be honest with you. I think Derek's, not all at the time, but some of the time, and particularly with Ozzy coming from deep in that, there's obviously different methods of playing it. But I will go back to Davy on Sunday. He obviously changed the sweeper because you need a certain type of player to play that. I'm not saying Sean Murphy wasn't that, but this is a different way of playing it. And it gives you an awful lot of options, because you can shove your sweeper up in front of the 11 if you want it. There's a lot of options to be able to do with this, which I think we will see over the next couple of years, which sort of confirms your point. But the point I want to make is this. How many times did Wexford wing-backs and midfielders turn up on the opposite side of the field? And we'd call it the open side of the field. In other words, the players on one sideline and the open side then is the other sideline. How many times did that happen? It happened an awful lot, and it was very, very effective. And I'm going back now to basketball. That's a basketball play about where you take the ball up and then you change the direction to the far side. Okay, it's much smaller. Rectangle and all of those things, much easier to implement. But I'll go back.
But you can only do that if you run the ball. See, Wexford ran the ball very well. If you're clearing that down the field, those attacking backs aren't up in time. And that was a criticism. I don't want to be criticising Waterford too much, but I thought they cleared too much ball down instead of running it through the hands.
Well, definitely you need to work the ball through the hands, but probably all game plans now are underpinned by that. Real clever hand pass, real good movement of your players, good support play, but the crucial one is good 30-metre hurley passes to the hand. If you can do that, look, and any of the ways. Incidentally, if you look at Dublin, and you look at their sort of motion offences and that, they work it from one side and they immediately switch it to the other place, searching out the space. Look, it's not dissimilar, and so we're very critical of it in one place and not in another. Now I'm just going to talk about something else, Willie, because it all depends on your personnel and it depends on your history. And I know, I'm going to put my own hand up here and say, look, I started off with a sweeper with Laois. Laois had conceded 10 goals. You play your first match and you concede another 10, you can kiss goodbye to your next 3 years very, very quickly. You need to solidify at the back, make yourself difficult to beat, and hopefully that when you do that, then you can take a couple of steps forward and move on with that. You have no business whatsoever going in wide open with inexperience at that level and think that you're going to just increase performance 100%, you're going to increase pace of players and all of that. It doesn't happen like that. So you've got to do something to make yourself difficult to beat first, and then that's your platform, work from there. But there's one other point on that, Willie, before we actually go off it. There's a couple of points that I suppose that we'd want to make on that. And there are bigger issues here that haven't been discussed, and I don't know why they haven't been. Davy has confirmed after the game that, he may not continue, and I sincerely hope that he does. But even if he continued for a year, what happens next for Wexford? Have Wexford planned that? Are they going to continue with that method of play for the next 10, 15 years? And if they are they looking at a certain type of manager that can implement that? Or are they going to change it around completely? There certainly was, we heard it on Thursday night ourselves, Willie, where, people were questioning the sweeper system and, should we go back to the traditional way of hurling I can tell you that will be a very difficult task for whoever comes in, and Parg is finding out that in Waterford at the minute. The problems here are this. You have a defence who, generally speaking, they may play off their man when the ball is the far side of the field, but when the ball is coming into your area, it's man to man, it's hip to hip, it's in his face. You can afford to do that because your sweeper is now marking the zones. So you don't have as much to do as a defender, and your behaviours are very, very different in this. You can go hard for the ball, and if you miss it in the breaks, he's going to pick it up and all of those things. Similarly, on the other side of the field, the mobility runs of the forwards are, generally speaking, reasonably structured to force space and to make space. But certainly the distribution zones that you want to put the ball into are pretty well defined for the team. You know what's going to happen. You change all that game plan around for next year, and that's a serious issue for Liam and for Matt and all of those players. You're into behavioural issues now. In other words, I was used to doing this routine for the last 3 or 4 years, and now you're expecting me to do something completely different. And I would suspect, I don't know, but I would suspect that that's the key issue behind what has happened in Waterford, and that's very difficult to manage your way through. I suppose that could take a year or two. So I think that's one issue. I think the other issue is that I'd love to see journalists discuss is there's, what's your hurling development plan for the county? What's your athlete development plan for the county? Do you need to sort of know what type of game you're playing at senior level? Because at the end of the day, that's what you're training players to play for. Do you need to know that beforehand before you actually develop the strategy for your hurling development plan for the county? Because Wexford at the minute, at under 14, under 16 and at minor, could very well be playing the long game, knock the ball into the square and so on and so on. When for the next 4 or 5 years, hopefully Davy stays there, they're going to be playing a completely different game. And now a minor coming into that setup has to learn all of these things when he should sort of know about it already. And the last point I'll make, Wooly, I suppose, I just think that Donal Logue needs to be a little bit careful in commentary like that. Clearly, he's a very, very passionate Cork man. Clearly, he has huge competencies to manage and coach his county, and I would assume that would be a goal of his. But look, he must know that there's plenty of people in Cork County Board who would only just love to have a reason to say, Donal, I don't think you're going to get the job here. And you've got to ask the question, in a really high intensity, pressured environment, standing on the sideline as John Myler was, or as John Kiley was, or as Davy was last weekend, and these questions are put to you. How do you react to that when you reacted to a studio question like last Sunday? So, Davy doesn't need a plonker like me to give him any advice around that, but I think he does need to think about things like that if he certainly has plans to go on and manage Cork, and I would love to see that in time. Obviously I would like to see John Myler staying there and giving that another year, but in time I think Donal Logue would bring an awful lot to Cork.
Yeah, Ken McGrath said absolute nonsense, ego's gone out of control. Now I know Derek McGrath from meeting him a couple of times. I don't think Derek McGrath has an ego at all unless one has developed. I think he's egoless actually. I think he's salt of the earth. I think Donal Logue might have a bit of an ego. I've had one dealing with him before when I worked with Off the Ball, where he rang me up and he wasn't very nice to me on the phone over something Ger Gilroy said. I didn't like the way he spoke to me, so I think maybe, in my opinion, he could have an ego, and he seemed to set the tone with that whole conversation. So look, we'll leave it there, Cheddar, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the matches. So you've touched on Davy Fitz's future. So he was non-committal. He's done his 2 years. 2 years? He's done 3 years. He's done 3 years. Yeah. Do you think Davy will have a lot of regrets after that match? I think he will. He brought on Nolan on for Murphy, which was an offensive. You can't be critical of this, because at the time that was an offensive substitution, and if he hadn't made that offensive substitution and they lost, they would have said, oh, well, that was very negative. So, it wasn't a bad substitution. But he did say this after the game: I just feel the sending off, you'd think it would work for you. It actually didn't. It allowed Tip more space, and they got to avoid our sweeper a good bit. They played smart. But the reason that happens because of the substitution Davy made. So he's drawn attention to the fact that it was down to 6 on 5 rather than 7 on 5 or 7 on 6.
I suppose, the difficult thing with all of these things, you can never have the counterfactual in a game. In other words, if it had played another way, here's what would have happened.
But I think he'll blame himself for that substitution.
I don't know. I think at the time, clearly, it was a substitution that he would have thought about beforehand. And look, Ed Nolan is a fair hurler. You're not bringing on anybody. I mean, even in Wexford Park on the Saturday night against Kilkenny, even though he got a red card at the end of the match, but he is a key influencer in the team in the way they're hurling that. I take your point, Willie, but look, the other side of it is if Tipperary had snuck out by a point and Wexford didn't go for it, would you feel equally? You'd probably feel worse.
You would,
of
course.
I think it's a difficult one to call. I think he will certainly have regrets about it. I think Wexford hurled brilliantly, really liked what they did. But I think the last 15 minutes, the team and Davy and everybody will have some regrets about that. I do think, Wooly, that they might have used the substitutions maybe a little bit quickly, but I'd be very careful what I'd say there, because I'm assuming that they have all the analysis at their fingertips in terms of who's covering what and who's likely to fatigue at certain levels and all of that. And look, generally speaking, the sports scientists wouldn't be long giving you an answer on that. That your performance levels drop by a certain percentage after you go past the red line and blah 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 blah. I'm assuming that the substitutions were made on that, but it just didn't look like. I just thought that some Wexford players, they just seemed to really have the better of their Tipperary opponents, and when the substitutions were made, it just didn't seem like that after that. But look, that could just be that the ball wasn't flowing there. It's very, very difficult to make those.
Here's a big thing that happened. is when Wexford had the extra man, they went long with 14 of their next 15.
That was
puckouts.
crucial.
Isn't that crucial? And
yeah.
they lost 10 of them. Now you have to remember who they're pucking it down on. Brendan Maher, Padraig Maher and Ronan Maher. What are these lads' strength? Like, I mean, the whole talk of Tipperary is that these lads are unbeatable in the air. Like, it's a huge strength. So, Jesus, when Davy looks back on that, he'd be going, what were we thinking here at that point? Or where was the man behind the goals that was highlighted, to say, here, stop this?
Well, I think, Wooly, that was probably certainly was advised. Look, if your goalkeeper was doing that and, maybe the pressure got to him and the game pressure and that got to him, you certainly would go in and give him an instruction to work the ball through the hands. Bear in mind that was successful for them before that. They've planned it very well. They're very good at it. Why wouldn't you stick at it? But if you're a player up, you definitely will do that. Drag Tipperary around the field, force them to come back to field. Instead of that, they've done the opposite. If you look at the videos the video of those puckouts, just before the ball lands, it just looked like that all the Wexford players were stacked up the middle. So they didn't even spread the play out and that. Look, and these things can happen. You can be on the sideline, you can't get word in. Look, you couldn't hear the person who was beside you talking to you in the course of these games. So it's difficult to get word into people like that. But that's what happened. And it was the exact wrong game to play against a tiring Tip team and against, someone who have a good little bit of mileage on the clock, although I never really, think about that a whole lot because
they didn't look like it on Sunday.
Well, you look at some of the greatest marathon runners in the world have been well into their 30s, maybe into their 40s, and they were still performing. So if that's an endurance event and a 70 minutes hurling match is the same, well, look, that sort of blows that out of the water. But I just think that what they did, and it was more or less, look, let's go along and dog it out. Now, I'll say all of that and say we were 5 points up. There may be a feeling that would get into the team quickly. Let's get the ball out of the danger area, get it up there, keep it up there as long as we can, and we'll just see out this match. And look, it might have worked, but I just think that Wexford didn't stick to what served them really well earlier on, which is what I've described. Work the ball up one wing, have a runner, could be even a wing back, coming up the far wing in open space, putting the ball across the field. Now you have a Tipperary backline that's sprinting 30 metres to the right and immediately have to sprint another 60 to go left. Yeah. And look, that's not easy. You're going to buckle sometime. And I just felt that they played into Tipperary's hands. And you're right, playing into I think Ronan was at full back. I think we might look at Tipperary, Wooly, because I said some things on Thursday night which all didn't come to pass, but which a lot of them did. They shot from distance, they moved what do you call him up the centre, moved Bubbles onto the wing, so they definitely had a shoot from distance plan here. And even if you look at, well, what would you expect to see if that's what they were doing? Not a lot of ball went to their full forward line, even though they had two fair players in there. I think Shane McCallan only I think he maybe struck 6 or 7 balls. It would be unlike him because they normally feed him very, very, very well.
Here's the stats on Shane McCallan. From just 3 plays in the first half, this is Christy O'Connor on the RTE website has this. From just 3 first half players, he scored 1-1 and set up a point. And from 4 second half plays, he scored a point. He had a shot saved for a converted 65 and was fouled for a free. He'd 7 possessions.
Well, look, that probably explains my point, Willie. Yeah. And like they put 2 workers in the middle of the field. I thought Tip set up very well, and I thought their half back line was set up well. And I think they brought that second March shot back to the full back line, then brought Brendan back as well. And I think I actually remember seeing Barry Heffernan a number of times over the last couple of years. He's an Ena Aero club man. Tommy, there was a number of them, a number of his family that are very, very good hurlers. They were on the Tip panel for a number of times over the last couple of years. But this is a tall player, very athletic player, and he certainly dropped the blade a few times on Sunday, which I didn't expect that I'd see. There was a bit of hardness about him and toughness about him on Sunday. In other words, that they're not taking a step back here. And I think he's a natural wing back because he's got pace to play at his height. And I think the structural changes that Liam and that Eamon and that Tommy and Dara made were crucial to the way Tipperary played. But what was absolutely crucial was their ability to be able to score points, in very little room. Contrast that with Limerick on Saturday night. If Limerick had that type of finishing power, that would probably beat Kilkenny by 10 points. I'm exaggerating, but certainly 5 or 6 points quite easily. So I think a lot of credit has go to Tipperary management for setting up the way they did, and I thought it was quite successful. Incidentally, Wooly, there's one other point that might wish to be made. We talk about Shamey. I think the only ground strike in the whole match was Shamey Callan's goal. I could be wrong. And we're going back now to, sweeper game and all of that. Is ground hurling now simply dead? And, I've certainly heard...
Well, it is.
Well, I've heard a lot of people, in the last couple of years, and I've heard some Offaly people in the last couple of years, bemoaning the fact that the Offaly ground hurling game, that we don't play it anymore. And, I think while you stay thinking about that, you're probably not going to progress. We're talking about innovation of hurling and staying up at the times and all of that type of stuff. And, I'm just going to finish off on that point that we discussed earlier on. There's certainly a fantastic discussion needed around all of that in terms of different styles of hurling in counties and so on, what's successful and what won't be successful and so on. That's the level of depth that I would expect. I'd actually love, you mentioned Christy O'Connor. He's one of the people who just doesn't take what he sees on the surface as being the real thing. He digs under the skin here and looks at the facts and tries to associate the facts with the reasons why trends are happening during the game. And he certainly would be a very good man to have a look at all of this in its entirety and look at different styles and what's effective and what isn't effective and so on.
Yeah. So Tipperary are having an open training session on Wednesday, July 31st, tonight. So anyone listening wants to get down and they want to get that out of the way. It's a meet and greet, because let's be honest, the All-Ireland final is on Sunday fortnight. This isn't the big month turnaround that it used to be. It's 3 weeks, and you want to get that out of the way. And it's nice to connect with the fans as well, because let's be honest, Tipperary didn't travel in that many numbers. And I suppose Liam is trying to get them all on board and maybe get that kind of, All-Ireland final atmosphere and maybe fervour, and maybe just to connect with the supporters and maybe say thanks to the ones that came up to Croke Park. I suppose that's the thinking behind that. I think
it was a good, decent tip crowd there, actually, Willie. It was just simply a massive Wexford crowd.
They were drowned out, yeah.
Oh, it was absolutely. I mean, it's disappointing that they're not in an All-Ireland, even just from that point alone. God, they're the most passionate supporters. We spoke about this on Thursday night. They're the most passionate supporters you will find anywhere. So I don't think it was necessarily that Tip didn't travel, but you will always want to connect with your supporters. I mean, that's a huge part of the identity of the team, where they sit within the community, who they represent and all of that. Those are important wirings, hard wirings within the team that you always need to go back and just double check. And you will always do a meet and greet with supporters and that anyway. I mean, that's part of the development of the game in the county. And of course you want to get it out early, because you need to concentrate on your game plan for the following Sunday.
Yeah,
or the
exactly.
following fortnight.
Some Limerick stats just to finish up with. This is from Christy O'Connor again. Wait to hear this. The Limerick half forward line, right? 27 possessions combined between the three of them. Now, I would say in some Limerick games you might see one of them getting 27 possessions. Do you know what I mean? So, there's your answer straight away why Limerick didn't get into their flow, because their half forward line didn't get into the game, or weren't allowed to get into the game, or wasn't the same space for them, or all these things.
Yeah, I just thought there was some lazy comment on that as well, Wooly, on Limerick. I thought in the first 15 minutes, just Kilkenny were right in their face. They were rightly aggressive and all of that. Why wouldn't you be? The one thing that you really need against a team that plays through structure and that plays possession game and works the ball through the hands, you need a great tackling plan, and you need to be aggressive and knock them off their perch. And certainly Kilkenny brought that to the game. But I thought after 15 minutes that Limerick actually survived that and turned that over themselves. There was an awful lot of rucks that they won, and that they sort of gang tackled Kenny players and turned over the ball.
It was a half of two halves.
It was, definitely was, yeah. Incidentally, there was a huge amount of bloody rucks in that game. People will rave about the quality of the game. The quality of the game, wasn't as high, I think, as people were writing it to be. If you go there, hurlers hate to see rucks going on around the place where 6 or 7 players were in trying to dig out the ball and all of that. There was a lot of them in that, and there was a lot of throw-ins in that game as well. But go back to your point, Willie. Look, that's a major factor. If your key parts of your game plan just aren't getting possession in the scoring areas, well then, you're in a little bit of trouble. The real trick about that, I think, is Kyle Hayes and Gerard are, they could equally play wing backs. Are they out and out efficient scoring machines? Garrod Hegarty. Are they out and out efficient? Now, Tom Morrissey has played mostly hurling in the forwards. You compare that to the likes of Adrian Mullen, case in point. did he get that many possessions? Not a huge amount. What was his score and returns from the possessions he got? More importantly, in the tight situations, what was returned? I mean, his score was an incredible score, the one that he scored on the back foot. And that's the little bit of a difference in the Garrod Hegarty's, Kyle Hayes, Tom Morrissey work. They're massive high on work rate, but maybe not as high on execution of scores in tight positions. And of course, when your possessions in the hand drop a little bit, that's going to be even a further problem. And I saw some stuff as well about Aaron Gillan, being double teamed and that. That's not what I saw. I saw Hugh Lawler going one-on-one most of the time, and a lot of the time he was actually left on his own, just simply out hurling Aaron Gillan. And I think there's one crucial part that I've alluded to a number of times over the last year. I thought that Seamus Flanagan was the most important player in the Limerick way of playing.
Yeah.
And he wasn't exactly the marquee scorer or skills man or anything like that, but he was the critical person who opened up the space. And a lot of the games I would have seen, I would have seen the coach going into him and actually telling him where he wanted to be. Paul Kinnerk going into him and telling him where he wanted to be. And certainly in the All-Ireland, I remember being to him at one stage, and Seamus Flanagan was actually running up and down the far sideline. And of course the Galway full back followed them out, opened up all the space for Gillan. And I think this year they changed that around. Now I do think Seamus Flanagan probably lost a little bit of form. I saw him below in Thurles the day of the Munster Championship match against Tip, and he had 4 or 5 chances of getting the ball in his hand. He just dropped it. He just seemed to have lost form this year for whatever reason. And Limerick then went with 3 scoring full forwards, but they didn't have anybody there in that full forward line to open up the places and open up the space for the likes of Gillan and that to really get the ball in a different position. So most of the time they were getting the ball contested with Hugh Lawler or Paul Murphy or whoever. And I just thought that Seamus Flanagan may not be the marquee player, but he was hugely influential in winning an All-Ireland for Limerick last year. And look, he may have just lost form, and you can't pick a player if he's not in form, simple as. But I thought he was a fierce loss to Limerick.
Yeah, no, he definitely was. Just to finish up on the Shane Dowling goal, Cheddar, you're following hurling a long time, playing it a long time. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I know, I coach that now.
Really?
Willie, to do,
From that distance though, because we see it a lot. Like Colin Fennelly can do it when you're on top of the goalie and there's a lad chasing you, but this was from 21
I know
metres,
it was out a bit, all right. I do agree with you on that.
21 yards out. But
look, coaches do coach that. Generally speaking, the commentary is, take it into the white of the eyes of the goalkeeper and then execute like that.
That's to avoid being hooked. But I don't think he did it to avoid being hooked. I thought he did it because there was a lad in front of him and he would have expected a normal shot. I think this was done in a different scenario to ever I'd seen it being done before.
I think it is. The point I'm making is that they do practice this now, so it's sort of, it's not something that they have to sort of think about as such. And I do agree with you. It was further out than the norm here now, definitely. And you wonder a little bit, I think Limerick have used Shane very well in the last year. Obviously, they gave him a couple of chances to stake a place in the team this year, and he probably just didn't grab it. But you'd wonder on Sunday that, particularly when your scores at 10, 11 and 12 weren't really nailing it. Sorry, I just wanted to go back to one point on that, Wooly. I thought Kilkenny were dominating the game, and they were dominating the game by just wearing down the team here. And I don't want to underplay their qualities in the team. I'm just making that point. And Limerick pulled back Kyle Hayes to play in front of the centre-back. At the time, of course, we didn't know at the time that the player was injured. But when they did that, they actually got a toehold in the game and played a little bit better. And in the second half, seemed to move Kyle back up the field again when they brought on Barry Murphy. And you just wonder that if they had made a couple of changes like that, would it have made a difference to Limerick? Because they weren't really firing, particularly with that 10 and 12 coming deep, gathering ball, being an outlet for ball coming after the defence, and that. They just, as you said, didn't get enough possession really to be creative enough to be able to either put ball inside or to shoot from distance. And you just wonder if they had made that change with Shane coming in, would you have snuck a couple of points to get over the line? It's hard. Look, again, counterfactual, you don't know.
Do you think that a team has reached its peak system-wise like Limerick, and now they might need to rethink it a bit? Because when you talk about Kilkenny not following their half-forward line as much, you saw them in Ennis with Clare did the same thing, and that seems to be the secret now, and have your forwards working like dogs, even your full forward line working like dogs. So when teams have probably tactically, especially after watching Kilkenny maybe do well against it, next year do they need to have some sort of plan B where they're maybe have a lot more of a long ball option and not everything has to go through, you know, a structured kind of short ball game?
No, I think you'd want that anyway, Wally. You look, on any given day, you know, the system just might sit down on you, and you know you need something else. You need something different, and I do think that Limerick probably did come with something different in the full forward line this year. Play either the three flat across the front, or that have another man coming out the field. It might be Peter Casey some of the times. They did certainly come with something different, but I just think that the main plank of their system of winning the ball, working it through the hands, it was good. But it just wasn't as slick as last year, and there was just a number of breakdowns that you wouldn't have seen last year in terms of working the ball through the hands. But crucially, the shooting just simply let him down. Unmarked sometimes in front of the goal, shot some wides. It's not typical of that quality of player. It's certainly not typical at that level. And so you asked the question. I wouldn't think they need to change anything. One thing they do need
get
to
Flanagan back in form.
Well, I just think he certainly would add different dimension.
Yeah, no, I made that point on Monday too.
There's a different dimension to when he's playing. But look, they have the quality, and they have a lot of young players to come on there as well. I think it would be helpful if they had one or two players to come in to just give it a real energy boost. But they need to be better players than what's there. You don't think just bringing somebody in for the sake of it. But certainly they haven't reached their peak yet. But that would be very much down to the hunger within the team, and the hunger within the team to prove themselves and to improve themselves. And look, you go back to Clare in 2013, people said they were going to be there for a little while. You go back to Tip in 2010, people said they were going to dominate for 10 years. Did they have that real single-mindedness to be the greatest team there ever was? And not alone just to be that, but to put in place whatever is needed to be that. You'd probably say no, they took their foot off the pedal a little bit. And the margins at the top, Willie, is probably 1%. You take your foot off the pedal 10 mile an hour and somebody's going to pass you out, and that's what happens. So I think Limerick have, obviously getting the same management back again will be crucial to them, and re-energising the dressing room and that again, and going again. Look, there was nothing in it. They beat themselves really on Saturday night, to be honest.
Yeah, so don't rip up the script. Anyways, listen, that's all we've time for. Only one thing left to announce, and that is we'll be doing a live show in Liberty Hall on Thursday the 15th of August. That's obviously before the All-Ireland hurling final. So we know it's Kilkenny Tip, and my father said to me you would have been hoping for Wexford Limerick with the support, and I was like, okay, that's a good point. But Kilkenny Tip have some serious legendary players that we can call on that maybe Limerick and Wexford don't. So it's going to be a brilliant show. We'll have a lineup announced fairly soon, but it will be in Liberty Hall here in Dublin on the 15th of August. So keep your eye out for that.
And Willie, before you go after that, I've got to give a call out to Tom Dempsey, one of the best singers I ever heard last Thursday night.
Very good. His song did 100,000 views on Twitter alone. So it went down a treat.
I'm not surprised. To be honest with you, I was at the side that I was searching for a hurley there. He'd motivate anybody. I was even going to grab a leg off the table in front of me and go out and start flaking.
It was passionate stuff, but yes. I honestly I think I know the words off to both those songs. I watched those two videos so many times. It was just brilliant stuff out of the two lads.
There's one other point, Willie. I'm going to finish in this one, please. I know we're a little bit over time. There was a number of years when I thought Wexford always played with heart. Wexford teams always did play with heart, but I just thought there was just too much emotion and not enough structure and planning and intelligence and all of that. And I think they've got that absolutely right at the minute. And look, I said earlier on, I think Wexford need to move quickly now in terms of keeping this team properly motivated in the right place with the right people to try and get over the line. Yeah, exactly right. That's it. We will be back. Won't be next Monday actually. We've no hurling to review this weekend. We'll be back this day next, or Thursday week, tomorrow week. We'll do a show for you then. We'll talk to you then. Good luck.